Yes.
All
right, it is 9:30. We will go ahead and call the Technical Advisory Committee for February 18th to order. I'll start with roll call. Steve Bicking. Not here. Who do we have? Mike Von Bergen.
Here.
Al Schmidt. Did I see Al?
He went down to the health department.
He's here.
Okay, all right, so he is here.
There
he is.
There he is, okay. Mike Warner, did not see Mike. Jody. Brian Valesky.
Here.
Bruce Meyer.
Here.
Lori Ryan.
Here.
Let's see. Dan Ziller. Scott Hayjack.
Here.
Spring Duffy.
Here.
Lourdes Varga.
Behind Spring.
Darren Olson will be here. He's virtual and will be here. All right. Brad Andresen.
Yeah.
And Tyler Wilkie.
Here.
All right, so we have a quorum. And if anyone walks in, we'll just note it. Okay. All right, moving to minutes approval for January 14th. Any discussion on those? Do I hear a motion to approve the minutes for January 14th?
So moved.
By Mike. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, we'll go ahead with Al. Saw his hand. All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Okay, any public comment?
No public comment.
Any members' comments? Would anyone like to? No? Okay. We'll go ahead and move into the old business and possible action. So kind of a full agenda, so we'll try to move through this. If discussions are kind of ongoing, as sometimes they turn out with this group, we'll just go ahead and maybe table it to get to some other items. But we'll go ahead and start with 5.1, the Wetland Restoration Fund. I'll go ahead and hand that over to Scott to go through that. Before he does that, we did share this with you guys previously, so now we're at a point where we feel like we've kind of hit everything that we want. So we feel like we're pretty much there. So I'll go ahead and let Scott share
Okay.
the update.
And we have run through this with the Stormwater Committee as well. So what I was going to do is just kind of run through the changes that have been made. And I also want to emphasize kind of why this is so important. There are no Army Corps of Engineers credits available in the county right now. So if there are wetland impacts, the only way to mitigate for them would be through the Wetland Restoration Fund. The pricing and system hasn't been touched since 2010, and so the pricing was significantly out of date. So with the changes, we want to make sure the changes were consistent with the SMO and with current practices. So I'll just kind of run through the changes. If people have questions, just let me know and we can talk through them. But under purpose and applicability, the number one goal is no net loss of wetland acreage, and then added the goals being providing wetland mitigation alternatives in watersheds without U.S. Army Corps of Engineers approved wetland mitigation banks, and then maintaining and enhancing natural systems that reduce flood damage, help improve water quality, both surface and groundwater, and provide healthy habitat for indigenous wildlife. Previously, we had 2 wetland restoration funds. So anything on the east side of the county would be going into the Fox River watershed. Anything on the west side of the county would go into the Kishwaukee River watershed. As you're aware, we're planning on trying to do watershed planning across the county. We're going to have 3 watersheds as part of that planning process. And so what we're doing is we're setting it up to have 3 wetland restoration funds instead of just the 2. The watersheds are consistent with the watershed boundaries that we would be using for watershed planning across the county. That way the 2 programs are working in concert with each other. So you've got a big area for the Kishwaukee River watershed. The Fox River watershed has basically been broken up into both the Fox River watershed and then the Nippersague Creek watershed to the north. My biggest concern there was that there wouldn't be enough projects to accumulate funds in each of the watersheds. But particularly with the development going on in Wonder Lake, I don't know that that's going to be an issue. And I have provided off-ramps, which we'll talk about further. But you know, the map up on the screen shows the watershed boundaries for the 3 wetland restoration funds. Any questions on that so far? Okay. And then in the description, I also tied it to HUC boundaries. So HUCs are hydrologic unit codes, and so those are watershed boundaries that have been identified by, I believe, the U.S. Geological Survey is the source of those boundaries. And so if there are watershed plans that where the boundaries differ a little bit, we can always go connect them to the HUC codes that have been established. Payment to the Wetland Restoration Fund may only be used to mitigate impacts to isolated waters in McHenry County. So this is not set up to take credits for impacts to wetlands under core jurisdiction, simply isolated waters of McHenry County. And that's, we can only pay into those funds, one, after applicants have demonstrated avoidance and minimization of wetland impacts in accordance with the Stormwater Management Ordinance, have been properly employed for their project. And so mitigation is the last option in the mitigation hierarchy. First, you have to demonstrate avoidance, then minimization. So if you can't avoid the wetland, you've got a road that has to go through this area. You move the road as far west as possible to minimize the impacts. Then after you've done avoidance minimization, then you can pay into the wetland mitigation fund, or wetland restoration fund. 2, if there are no credits available from a U.S. Army Corps of Engineers approved wetland mitigation bank within the same watershed. And then I identify the watersheds as the wetland impact is occurring. So we are not set up, we don't have the staffing, the manpower, or the expertise to vet a wetland bank in McHenry County. The Army Corps of Engineers has that expertise. So if there is a wetland mitigation bank where they have proactively gone in, developed a bank that meets Army Corps of Engineers standards, then that would be the primary source of mitigation. If there is no banking credits available, then you can pay into the wetland mitigation or wetland restoration fund. And then I did strike out language that had gotten into details about the wetland banks that were available at that time. That's kind of redundant information, and so we just struck any reference to the banks that are available at any specific time. Right now, there are no bank credits available. There are 2 banks that have been approved by the Army Corps of Engineers, but they don't have any credits available. And as Ernest alluded, McDOT's going to grab up anything they can. So just no need to really reference that in here. So minor verbiage word changes. I make a reference to the fee in lieu will not necessarily match fees charged for wetland mitigation banks. And then I just clarify, since those fees are often determined by bank developers based on factors beyond the county control. So just a little clarification and why we're not being completely consistent with banks. A little bit in the middle of the next page, I talk about the TAC responsibilities. So the TAC shall establish Wetland Restoration Fund Subcommittee. The responsibilities of the WRF Subcommittee shall be to annually make a public call for projects, and that's for projects, wetland restoration funds that have accumulated a minimum balance of $75,000. So after a fund has accumulated $75,000, we can open up a request for proposals. One of the off-ramps I talked about, if a wetland restoration fund has a minimum balance that remains below $75,000 for more than 5 years, the McHenry County Stormwater Committee can opt to combine funds in 2 or more wetland restoration funds to make a public call for projects in the respective watersheds. So if the Nippersink Creek watershed has $25,000 in there for more than 5 years and is not achieving that $75,000, they can combine it with the $50,000 in the Fox River watershed, WRF, and put out a call for projects in both of those watersheds. That way, this provides flexibility while still trying to maintain the 3 WRFs. Does that make sense? Okay. Then going to the last page. Once again, this is an off-ramp. If a wetland restoration fund has a minimum balance that remains below $75,000 for more than 5 years, oh, I already talked about that. So the next set of off-ramps are if a wetland restoration fund account has maintained a balance exceeding $75,000 for over 5 years and no suitable project has been identified within that 5-year time period, the McHenry County Stormwater Committee may elect to A, donate the funds directly to a conservation organization whose primary purpose includes creating, restoring, or protecting wetland habitat in McHenry County. This may include the Hackmatack National Wildlife Refuge, in parentheses, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Friends of Hackmatack, the McHenry County Conservation District, the Land Conservancy of McHenry County, or a similar organization with a proven track record of wetland creation, enhancement, or protection. And then if the other alternative would be to make the funds available to fund a nature-based project or projects identified in an IEPA-approved watershed-based plan that are designed to provide ecosystem services consistent with wetlands such as water quality treatment, flood mitigation, or wildlife habitat. And so if an account has over $75,000 in it for over 5 years and we keep putting out requests for projects and don't have any viable projects to approve, instead of having those funds just sitting in an account in perpetuity, if the Stormwater Committee wants to take a different approach, there are at least off-ramps there where the money would go into some form or entity or project that would be replacing the wetland values that were lost. So it's just trying to provide flexibility while directing how the program works. So hopefully that all makes sense to people. If anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to run through them.
So where does the $75,000 come from, and how do you arrive at that figure for that?
And so the figure's been, that's what it's been since the program was developed. And $75,000 needs to be a big enough project so that you have some assurance that it's actually going to succeed. $5,000 wetland mitigation project, that's just not a viable project. So it needs to be a large enough number to help ensure that it'd be successful. As far as where the money comes from, so if MCDOT is widening a road or replacing a bridge is going to impact wetland. So if they impact an acre of wetland, then they have to mitigate that with 1.5 acres. So they would pay into that wetland restoration fund. The same would be for a developer. If a developer is impacting an acre of wetland, then they typically have to replace it with 1.5 acres or more, depending on the quality of the wetland. So instead of having to mitigate on site, buying land to create wetland to replace the lost wetlands, they are able to pay into a wetland restoration fund and be free and clear once the payment's made. If they are doing wetland mitigation themselves, then they're on the hook for 5 years of monitoring and management and then maintaining that in perpetuity. And very few developers are in the business of maintaining wetlands. So it's a way of ensuring that the flood mitigation benefits, water quality benefits, and other benefits of the wetlands are being replaced. So hopefully that makes sense.
So then the restoration costs you got, is that just the figure you're using now to update that to $85,500?
Well, actually, thank you. I did mean to get into that. So, yeah, the rate structure, the top set of columns are the costs that we've had since 2010. I used the federal calculator to update the land costs for each of the watershed areas. And then work with numbers that were provided by the Village of Algonquin based on real projects that they've been doing. So it shows the restoration costs that they provided. down below. And so we updated the land costs and the restoration costs to come up with the fee structure shown in that second column. And then the map on the next page shows the different watersheds that have the different fee structure.
Question.
Yes.
Sorry, I was late. The map shows, okay, this is a different map now.
And so this map right here is showing the rate structure. So go back to the one you said. So like
Yeah, my comment was that the colored map only shows 3 watersheds, and
Right.
then there's more on the rate structure.
So the colored map shows the Wetland Restoration Fund watersheds. So historically, we had the Fox River and the Kishwaukee River, and those were, there was a separate wetland restoration fund for each of those. We're developing a watershed-based approach for the entire county that is going to be broken up into these 3 watersheds. So to be consistent between our watershed planning and the wetland restoration fund, because they are very much the same, projects are going to be based on those boundaries. We want a continuity there. So that's what the colored map is showing, is each of the wetland restoration funds. And then the second map is showing the land value for the rate structure. So, you know, it wouldn't be fair to have mitigation in Coon Creek on the bottom southwest corner of the county cost the same as it does in the village of Cary.
We'll update the map, so like Coon Creek would fall in the Kishwaukee River Watershed Fund,
Gotcha.
right? So then you could have someone in Coon Creek, someone in Piscataquis Creek, that would all go to the Kishwaukee Rivershed Fund. We're gonna update this map to show that coloration, to help show the 3 funds and which one of these individual watersheds fall within which fund.
Have you had any conversations with Lake County? So let's say that there's a bank that's in the Fox watershed that's in Lake County. Does your ordinance allow payment into that bank?
No.
Okay.
Not currently, yeah.
And that,
Yeah, I think that would be opening up a whole nother can of worms. I don't think that would be viable.
And that's coded, that's codified, where's the language that says that in
That says that we can't pay into Lake County.
your? Yes.
Well, it's just through this document via the map.
Yeah, I think, you know, the only way it would be allowed is if it said that you could do it. Yeah.
We don't have any language currently, so the Wetland Restoration Fund is coded into the Stormwater Management Ordinance.
Well,
And then this would be the document where you would look at the map at the different watersheds.
Okay.
So we don't have anything that discusses that potentially it extends into Lake County or Kane County for that.
well, and it's just for isolated waters in McHenry County. So it does explicitly state that in here. So it's just for mitigating for isolated waters in McHenry County.
Okay.
I want to go back to that $75,000 deal. You made a comment in one paragraph that if a fund was underfunded and one had too much, you were going to move money into the underfunded project or area. Then the last paragraph here, if a fund's got $75,000 that they're not using, you want to give it away. Well, the first thing you should do is fund that fund that's underfunded. Then if you got anything left, you can give it away.
So the way it would work is the funds build up. So once an individual fund gets to over $75,000, the idea is then we would send out requests for proposals. If during that time, we don't have any viable projects, or the projects that come in, the committee, the subcommittees, they don't like what they see, then that would stay in basically a state where we have money, we've opened it up for projects, but we don't have anything viable. So then how do we use that money? So the next idea would be then we can combine with another watershed to potentially create, you know, where, let's say one fund reaches $78,000, another fund's at 50. maybe we combine both, then now it's at like 125 or whatever that, whatever that number is. And maybe we're gonna see, a bigger project that was at that price that now maybe that one is to the liking and we can fund that instead. The other issue potentially is we sit there where we don't have any projects. We try to combine and, we just don't have any viable options for one reason or another, whether it's economic or, those type of things. Then the idea would be that, do we want to try to give this money to an organization that's actively developing wetlands and restoring and has that as their core purpose? Or as we start to develop our watershed plans and others have in place approved IEPA plans, maybe there's some stream restoration projects that can meet that, or other things in individual communities in that watershed that maybe that's a good use of the money. So it's just trying to find more avenues to use that money instead of just kind of sitting there.
And I don't think that circumstance will occur. The likelihood that there's $100,000 available for a project and nobody asks for it is very unlikely. As opportunities for funding has shrunk, there's more and more competition for the few dollars that are out there. And so if Wetland Restoration Fund request for proposal goes out, I'm certain that we're going to have applications come in that are viable. But just in the event that it does happen, I felt we needed to provide off-ramps that directed the money where it would provide the greatest opportunity to replace the lost values. So that too much or too little, we have off-ramps that are viable.
Are they gonna be sustainable with 75,000? Because we used to have a restoration cost of 45,000 and now it's 85,000 per acre. So we used to get like 1 3/4 acre of restoration with 75,000 and now it's gonna be less than an acre.
I think maybe we're misunderstanding each other. Can you explain your question again?
No, I'm just saying the $75,000 wasn't adjusted for inflation like everything else.
So it should be, instead of a $75,000.
I would think it would be higher, to account for the cost of doing a viable restoration plan.
That's a good point. And as I was reading this just now, it also, bigger projects have greater potential for success. That's actually why wetland mitigation banking became a thing. Historically, the developer would have to mitigate on site. So if they have to replace, mitigate for 0.75 acre, then they could put that 0.75 acre of mitigated wetland in the middle of a parking lot. And there's just no way that wetland is gonna actually function as a wetland. And so the bigger the project, the more viable that it's gonna succeed. So at the very least, maybe what we should do is, have the $75 be a minimum threshold, but not necessarily that's when it goes out for release. Or are you thinking like $100,000 be the threshold?
I don't know, I'm just bringing it up. So.
Just to clarify, I think Steve, what you're saying is you're looking at the 2025 restoration cost based on Village of Algonquin, and per acre, that's at roughly 85,000. So if we have a minimum of 75, the concern is that we actually won't have a viable project. That's kind of what you're getting at?
Right.
Okay, so
we're gonna have an acre, so I guess, I don't know what's considered viable. A half acre.
we've got some experts here to weigh in, I suppose.
It does kind of depend on the project, but you bring up a really good point. There should be continuity between the costs. So I'd be fine with raising that to a minimum of $100,000. That makes more sense that, everything else has changed. Why not change that? The $75,000 is somewhat arbitrary. So I'm fine with raising that to $100,000 as a way of providing some continuity there. I think
Ernest first, then Brad.
If I remember the last time when we actually did administer funds, we were only subsidizing. We weren't paying all.
Well, it'll vary project by project, but each of the projects that we had come in under previous, it was only paying part of
Right.
the project.
So I mean, we can up it to 100, that doesn't bother me, but I'm just like, well, whether it's 75 or 100, you're really not trying to foot the bill for the whole project.
That's a good point.
I think the other counterpoint with raising from like 75,000 to 100,000 would be, depending on how much we expect to come in, that could mean that the funds are sitting in place much longer before we hit that
Good
threshold.
point.
A lot of times you can see, because there may be some projects with the $75,000 threshold that come in that, you know, are really difficult and they're only getting, say, 3/4 of an acre out of it. There could be some where they're like, hey, this site is, you know, free and clear, there's no tree clearing, it's pretty easy, they may be able to do 1.5 acres with that same amount of money. So just in our counterpoint, if we raise the threshold, good chances are that money's gonna be sitting around unused for a longer period of time. I don't know traditionally how much money has been taken in with this method, is it?
And that's one thing we were looking at. I mean, we only had 5 projects over the 15-year period that we've had it.
From the records that we have, I think we've had about 4 or 5 projects. And then that went out to fund 2 projects at around 130, 120, somewhere in that ballpark.
But we are expecting, you know, as development ramps up and the Army Corps of Engineers is taking jurisdiction of fewer and fewer wetlands, our role is going to increase. And that's also another reason why it's important for us to update this at this time. But all great points. I don't know that we've had a consensus, but I do think that Brad's point, that if we do up that, the potential for it to sit unused does increase. And there's really no benefit. And I guess the one thing we could change is that not make it mandatory at $75,000, but we can kind of see how things are going, and the Stormwater Committee can opt to direct the TAC to release a request for proposals after a minimum of $75,000 is achieved.
How much is in it now?
About 12,000, I want to say.
Because
We're
the last time
working
we
on
did
getting
one
accurate
was-
accounting
It
of that.
was pretty long ago, the last time we did the distribution.
Yeah.
Right, it was probably at least 6 or 7
Yeah, it was your
years
guys'
ago.
project, MCCD, so
Yeah.
Hunter's Lake.
Conservation District.
4 years ago?
Yeah,
5
so
years ago?
it's been released 4 years ago. And so, and then one prior to that has been closed out, so that was Stearns Bend Restoration. But we haven't had enough come in to open up another fund at this point. So I guess based on what we've talked about, I think just keeping it at $75,000 makes the most sense. Your point was a good point, but I think there's just no real reason to change that up at this point.
I have a question. You said there's two banks right now?
There are 2 banks, but no credits.
And where are those, which watersheds are those banks in?
One in the Kish and one in the Fox.
So would this process allow, if you go out to RFP, you know, for a project, would this allow for those funds to be used at those banks?
No. And the mitigation hierarchy, I think, is the same as Lake County and the Corps. If our bank's credit, wetland mitigation bank credits available, that has to be the choice. You can't use wetland restoration fund if there are bank credits available. If there are no bank credits available, then the wetland restoration fund is really the only game in town.
Right, but the reason those banks are there and they don't have credits is because they might be in a period where they've sold out their initial release and they're waiting to get more credits approved by the Corps. So I would say that if those banks, if the credits were available when they had to pay into the fund, they wouldn't pay into the fund, they'd pay to the bank because that's the most viable way to mitigate. So since the credits haven't been released, they pay into your fund and the credits get released next week. you say, well, we can't use that money now for that bank. So I would say that the mitigation bank theory is your best option for getting viable projects and using that money. So I would suggest that the wording be changed to allow the funds to be used in banks when credits become available. Because that's, I mean, it's just a matter of time. They pay into your fund, and then, a week or month, a year later, credits are released. And that would have been the best option to begin with. So I would say that, I would ask that you think about modifying the language to allow that to happen.
Yeah, we actually, there was some language in there to that effect, and we changed it away. The way we're set up right now is as soon as credits come available, they are taken up by the Division of Transportation. Let me see what we had actually removed.
So DOT's buying out, but what if a bank opens up that's got 150 acres of credit?
Well,
DOT's
If it were 150, I can't speak for it. It's usually not that large, and we're not planning any expressways I'm aware of, so I don't know what would happen in that case. It's usually a few credits here or there, and that's it.
So I'll tell you, full disclosure, is I'm designing a bank in the Kishwaukee watershed right now that's gonna have 150 acres of credit. And
I'll
so,
let them know.
and I would say that, so I guess maybe it's a little selfish or whatever, but from a concept standpoint, I would think that those funds would be best used in a bank.
Well, so I had struck out language, the previous off-ramp, if an account exceeds $75,000 and no suitable project has been identified within 5 years, the Stormwater Committee may approve the purchase of mitigation credits from a mitigation bank. So the reason that we had struck that out, and a lot of discussion and thought went into that, is you're competing with the bank then. And these funds are intended to be there in lieu of banks. So you want the banks to have credits available for projects. If you're consuming all those credits, then you're reducing that as a viable option. I'm fine with putting that back in as an off-ramp in addition to the other off-ramps that we mentioned.
Are you designing it for a public entity or a private entity?
Private.
Well, and then, we don't want to compete with banks. That is not our intent with this in any way.
No, well, you are competing with them when the credits aren't released.
Well, you do have a point there, and
Well, I think, Mike, I think with the timing issue though, if someone wants a permit, they need to get through that process. So if you're gonna be 3 months out, you can certainly communicate that, but we can't tell an owner no, because your bank is gonna have credits available 3 months out when they want their permit
No,
yesterday.
I don't disagree with that, and taking money into the fee in lieu of. I'm just saying that if credits are available in a bank, that the fee in lieu could be used.
Could be, okay.
To purchase credits from the bank.
Well, so part of the problem there too is we're not charging the same as banks.
Right.
So if you're charging $120,000 an acre, and we've got a project in Coon Creek, the payments are set up right now at $103,000 an acre, and so
Yeah, the Kish numbers are pretty close to what we were assuming, very close.
but that would be my biggest concern is losing that flexibility in our fee structure, but having to, or conversely, if they, I guess in your case, it'd be the Kish, but say somebody else builds a bank in the Fox River watershed, in the lower Fox, the fee is $158,000.
Well,
So
I'm not saying, I'm not advocating that you require them to purchase credits out of the bank. I'm saying that you should make that an option. So when you go out to your RFP, you say, okay, we're trying to replace an acre of impact. And then the bank has the opportunity to offer an acre of credit for the value that you have in your fund.
Well, I think that could work potentially if the bank wants to submit for a proposal then.
Yeah, that's what I'm suggesting.
Then, you know, then it doesn't have to necessarily be, you know, however much it's gonna be there, just, you know, if let's say we've got 90,000, then maybe they request that 90,000 to go into continued development or, you know, whatever it is.
Right, I mean, when you do your RFP, you specify how many acres of mitigation that you want the project to create, right?
We have
I don't think
passed.
we did.
I thought we did.
I think we asked for proposals and had the money set aside,
I
but
thought that was part of our eval.
Well, the evaluation,
it was part of
so
the
we have
evaluation
a,
of how much you were mitigating and kind of the cost per acre of the mitigation was part of the evaluation, but it wasn't in the RFP to, you know, you must provide 1 acre, 2
Right.
acres, or.
no, the RFP is not that rigid,
Yeah.
because you may have 12 projects that are going in there, so to be able to get an exact comparison is not really viable. Your point's well taken, and we designed this to try and be respectful of mitigation banks, but in all honesty, your mitigation bank may not meet the hydrology criteria for 5 years.
That's right.
And so designing this to serve the wetland mitigation banks is not the purpose of this fund. I don't want to do anything that competes with it, but I do feel a little leery designing this specifically to serve a wetland mitigation bank.
But to
No,
Mike's point, is there anything in here that precludes the wetland mitigation banks from submitting on the RFP?
The challenge would be, so we do have a matrix that we use to evaluate projects against each other and come up with the optimal projects to recommend moving forward. I don't know how a mitigation bank would necessarily, I guess you'd use the overall, we created 60 acres of sedge meadow, 3 acres of wet prairie. You'd
That's
use
all.
the values of what you created as part of it.
It's all in the prospectus. So, the prospectus that you submit to the Corps, it outlines all the different plant communities that you have and what credits that you're getting for those communities.
So I guess, and I don't want to overcomplicate the program either, but I think what we could do is, I list a series of organizations whose mission is to provide conservation values.
Yeah.
We can include Wetland Mitigation Bank. U.S. Army Corps of Engineers approved Wetland Mitigation Bank as one of those entities.
Well, let me back up a moment. Is the question of can the wetland bank submit for proposal?
Yeah,
I think that's
part
the
of it.
main question, right?
Yeah.
If we allow that, then we evaluate it along with all other projects.
Okay.
Right, so then we don't have to change the language. We're not necessarily buying credits from you. You're just another applicant
Correct.
looking for that. And I would agree. I don't see why we would bar you from an application, and we would go through the evaluation process and may determine that you're actually the best fit. And to your point, that might be the most optimal way to spend money.
Is there a section that says who's eligible as an applicant?
No.
It would virtually be open to
Okay.
anyone, so does that help address?
Yeah,
any of your-
Okay, that explains it.
Brad, before I go to you, Tyler had something.
Well, if Brad's on the same track, mine's different, so.
Okay, is it along the same?
Yeah, so
Okay,
and
okay.
just kind of agreeing with that of having a mitigation bank that exists within the watershed, be an applicant, you know, be able to provide a proposal. Because I think the core point is if you have one large bank, that project's much more likely to be
Right.
successful as opposed to having a bunch of 1 or 2 acre sites
Right.
spread throughout the watershed. And then at that point, that proposal could be evaluated with all the other ones and, you know, then the decision can be made on, you know, which one makes more sense to go forward with. So I think, you know, I don't know if there needs to be a language change or, you know, we can just keep it as is, but know that we can be accepting.
There's no other
proposals.
specificity put towards who can apply.
Yeah.
But you bring up a good point, and, you know, my biggest concern was I don't want to design something to serve a private bank. And the way we've discussed this, there really is no limitation. And so I appreciate you bringing the point up, as long as we're not having to modify it in support of an individual. I think we're all on the same page.
Okay. All right, let's,
Yeah.
Tyler, go ahead.
My question is how we came to the land cost number. Because it seems like in 2010, those were high end of the range, and we're at the top end of the range again in 25. I mean, what does that land cost number?
How did you
It
come
simply
up
took
with
the land costs that were approved by the committee previously and applied, you can see the site that was used to increase the value. That's the same site that Lake County's used.
Basically an inflation factor. If you're asking the 2010 numbers, we don't have the background on how those were developed.
Okay.
We did do a lot of research to look with our assessor to try to figure out what kind of makes sense. It was a wide range of, and I mean a wide range of values. And I think for us, it was getting too complicated, that we felt like taking the 2010 numbers that were previously approved and applying the inflation calculator was the best way. And that looking at these numbers, they all seem to kind of generally fall within the ranges that we were seeing. But you know, it was a discussion that we had. Do we try to use a median number? Not all land is the same. Some falls within residential, some does not. And so there were just so many factors that were going into it that we just kind of landed at this.
So what's this number supposed to represent? An acre is per acre, right? Yeah, so per acre of what?
Of impact.
Of impact.
The impact, so what we're changing?
So it would be, you would,
Filling or?
well, let's say you're doing a development, the developer is looking to wipe out a half acre of wetland. So in that report, in the wetland report, there would be an indication on the quality and all of that. So the SMO outlines if you're doing, you know, depending on those classifications, then you might need to do anywhere from 1-to-1 to a 5-to-1. So you would be applying, you'd say, okay, I'm wiping out a half an acre, but it's high quality. So you need to then mitigate or provide back the benefit for 5 times that half acre. So then it would turn into 2.5. So you would take that 2.5 and multiply it by the fee depending on the watershed that it falls into.
But this is wetland. It's not prime dirt. It's not worth that kind of money.
Well, it is impactful from flood storage, water quality. So, yeah, is it prime development? You know, no. So will a developer want to develop into it? You know, like you said, it's not good soil potentially, so it's going to increase their costs. We can't make that decision, but if they want to, then, you know, this is set up in a way to allow them to mitigate wetlands. And, you know, this is, as Scott said, there's a hierarchy, so this is kind of at the end of the hierarchy. We would prefer to see development, you know, avoid wetlands.
I think that's part of the number, is deterring the impact to wetlands by a developer. You make it uneconomical for them to do it unless it's a very small amount.
You're incentivizing avoidance and minimization. And this is the way all of our, whether it's in the counties or the Corps of Engineers, this is the model that they follow.
So you're doing this to try and keep them from funding the fund you're trying to create.
Well, we're not, yeah, we don't want to bring money into the fund. That's, this is a way of providing opportunity without, the other alternative would be for them to actually create the wetland and bring it up to the proper performance standards and then maintaining that in perpetuity. And developers, that's just not what they're set up to do most of the time. And so this provides them the opportunity to pay into a fund and go on with their development.
Any other discussion? Okay, do we want to have a vote to move this forward to MCSC for their approval?
One question.
Yes.
Are we changing it to 100 from 75?
No, I think we're gonna leave it.
We'll keep it.
Yeah, I think that was kind of the consensus was, okay. All right, do I hear a motion to move it forward to MCSC? First from Brad, second from Darren. All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the ayes have it. We'll go ahead and move this to MCSC. All right, thank you everyone for that discussion. We'll go ahead and move into the next item of the agenda, which is 5.2, the GP1. So this is bringing back something that we've looked at previously. It's just sat out here, so I'm just gonna go through this real quick with you guys, bring up a couple of the new points, okay? So for the first one, minor culverts, I think this is one that nobody really had any issues with, but if anybody wants to bring it up or have comments, okay, Dan, go ahead.
Why would you go down to 90% of an existing culvert or drain tile? I truly, in trying to move water in this county right now, you need to be going bigger all the time when you're replacing something.
It depends. Sometimes, Ernest, if, you guys have culverts, maybe they want to line it in place because that's the better option. So if you're doing that, you're obviously losing some of that, right? You got a 12-inch diameter. If you're lining it, you're losing some of that. But economically, it might make sense. So there's those type of projects. That's really kind of why it's in there, to give that flexibility. If there's no potential issue for doing that, then that might be the best way for kind of keeping an old culvert that's in disrepair alive.
Why would you do that? Why would you keep an old culvert that's rotting away?
Well, it has to do with a whole series of things. One, it could be a huge effort to try to remove the culvert and replace it, and could shut down a road for a period of time, whereas the lining allows us to stay as we are. It could involve a series of other permits that would be just a great deal of effort and a great deal of time. And again, if we have an issue where the flow line has been deteriorated and we could get the scissoring action, we may have to shut a road down then while we would go through all that process, as opposed to calling a company. They in essence create an interior sleeve, but we do lose part of the capacity. I mean, we lose a small amount because you have to create another lens.
Municipalities as well, so it would apply to municipalities as well.
Yes, it would. They don't do as much lining, but yes, it would apply to them as well. Yes. We don't go out, Dan, and physically say, okay, we're going to take this culvert out and throw in a smaller one. That's never the thought pattern. But for the sake of expediency, not stopping traffic, not having to delay because of time frames, we do decrease the size slightly.
How long does one of them patches last?
They're right now, they give us a guarantee of 30 years. They have some out there that have been there for 40. So they because they're concrete, they actually have longer life than the metal. So, long time? How's that? Is that a good number?
Why did we include drain tile in 5? For what originally, do you know?
Say that again?
Drain tile in 5.
Just to give someone an opportunity, if you're, if you're replacing it, and again, this is within areas that are flood hazard and things like that. So drain tile, normally, if you were to want to replace it and there's no flood hazard or anything, it's an exempt activity as part of maintenance.
Okay.
So, which is why I threw in the exempted version below.
Okay.
So this would be a situation, or we just threw drain tile in there because maybe you're looking to add new drain tiles. This is not just to deal with repairs, this would be a permit to put potentially in new pipe as well.
I guess that's but that's only a flood hazard area, right?
Yeah, for flood hazard area, yeah. But this one specifically is minor modifications to existing, if they're in the, floodplain, if it's an outfall, things like that. So if it's outside, it's exempted.
But what at the bottom says it's outside flood hazard.
Right.
The one we're talking about?
Yes, for example, so K up top is the permit for, you're gonna need a permit to do this work, and then C and E, and I apologize, I just tried to eliminate a lot of unnecessary language for you guys. It's basically an exempted activity under maintenance, other maintenance activity, so other maintenance activity, if it's outside of the flood hazard area, allows you to do that without a permit, and that's probably gonna be 95% plus of the situations, I would imagine.
I mean, the biggest point is gonna be your outlet, right? But when agriculture's going in and getting a 1026 from the form from the NRCS and FSA, that covers the entirety of the project, right? So for the wetland delineation, all this stuff. So I guess the question is, do we require them to then come in and get a separate permit for just the outlet, repair and replace? Or if it's in kind?
If it's in kind, no. Again, depending on the location.
But I guess that's my question on the location, right? I can have
So-
an 80 acre farm, but the outlet that goes to the ditch, right, is in
Flood hazard?
flood hazard, right? Because the ditch, it seems like every ditch is in the flood hazard. So 79 acres of my project is exempted through this, but I get down to the last 20 feet down to the edge of the ditch bank, and I'm in flood hazard. So I have to come in and get a permit for the last 20 feet?
You would, yeah, the way that this is written, yes, it's in the flood hazard, so you would need a permit for that section.
Is that feasible or economical or?
That should be part of the.
Well, I mean, yeah, but, okay, so now what you would have to do then is have an exemption to say I'm an 80-acre farm versus the residential development that's looking to put in a little yard drain and punch it into the river as well.
So why don't we make that agricultural drain tile? Make that exemption.
I mean, I'm
actually work.
open, but what would the language look like for agricultural drain tile? I don't know how you would.
See, this is what's gonna happen, because this happens in wetland work all the time. We find that land on the map and we pull the outfall back, so it's out of that area, and now you have this big divot in a field because it's outside of some imaginary line, and that just said imaginary, it's a real line, but it's a line that is not really clearly delineated. So we do this all the time. Because people are, it's a dodge, and I understand it because there's permitting and timelines and everything involved. So maybe this is an opportunity to rethink if that should be exempted in some way, shape, or form. And I'm not the person to write that language, I'm just telling you what happens when these things get constructed.
This is what.
Because I mean, if it's
for.
residential versus agricultural drain tile,
Two different.
I mean, that's pretty clear. I mean, you know the difference between agricultural and residential drain tile.
Well, you could classify it as agricultural land use, you can maybe tie it to the land use.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of A1,
Residential.
zone properties that have that as well. I just don't necessarily want to get into the nuance of saying it's agricultural tile or regular tile or.
What about production agricultural tile?
Does that include pasture land? Right, and I've got to go through other farmland in order to get to my outlay. right? I'm thinking, I've got one farm that's 40 acres, had a pasture in it. The main tile ran through that pasture, but all the laterals ran out of the production cropland into that pasture land. And then goes down through, there was 40 or 50 foot of trees at one point, and so that was all other farmland when you're basing it on production style. And then to the outlet, to the ditch.
Well, I do want to, mention this is a general permit. It's very basic stuff. It doesn't ask a lot at the same time. It's a $250 permit. Now, yeah, I would love to save time and everything.
But these are guys that have already gone in and gotten a permit. I mean, percentage of agriculture that's in McHenry County that is in the farm program, that in order to do tile work, they gotta go in and they gotta get approval from FSA, right? And if not, the carrot and the stick on it is that they'll lose their insurance.
So my only drawback to that, though, is if someone goes and gets an Army Corps permit, they still have to come to a municipality and get a permit, IDNR, same thing. So if you cut this line, then aren't you saying that if anybody has any state or federal permit, you no longer have to get a local permit? I mean, that's kind of the concept you're using. It's kind of a broad stroke, I would say.
It goes back to the beginning of this whole stormwater ordinance. Agriculture should not have been included in it because we're basing it all off of residential development.
Dan,
So
if
there's
it
gotta
helps
be-
any, DOT, I've had so many of them come back at me and say, why do we even have to? We've already
I
got a
don't
road there,
understand why
we
you
already have
guys
a
do
bridge.
it. That doesn't make sense to me.
But we have to, and we go through the general ones. Some of the people at the office kiddingly call it an over-the-counter permit. Because you walk in there, you present what you have, and basically you receive a blessing, if you will. Now you can take the action with permit in hand. So, as I said, we face the same thing, but it's a reality, and we have to do it as well. So I don't know that
You got deep pockets to play this game. We don't.
Oh, no, we don't. All we have is taxpayer pockets.
Yeah,
Those aren't deep.
so I get to pay
Those
twice.
aren't deep. Those- We only get so much. So no.
So my biggest concern with it is that I've had an instance in the past where we came in and, oh no, you're exempt, and then turns into an regulatory enforcement proceeding later, because, oh no, you should have gotten the GP one, right? But the gentleman came in, asked for approval, do I need the permit? No, you're good, here's what I'm gonna do, great. Right, so it's just that clarity so that agriculture knows, yeah, you can go out and you can do this exempted development, right, this maintenance work, or can't you, right? And then the second part of that is, I've gotten approval to do it once, do I need secondary approval to do it again?
Yes, I think so, because that goes for anyone. If you need to go get Army Corps IDNR approval, you're getting 3-4 approvals. IEPA, you're getting 5 approvals. We're not hampering down on ag at all. It's just everybody plays by those rule books. You guys ag community might have to go through too, NRCS and us. And so maybe there's less to go through. Across the board, to me at least, this doesn't seem like it's picking on anyone unfairly. And that's why it's meant to be straightforward. You just come in, show us a map of what it is. And the other thing I will say is we do deal with a lot of those, Tyler. People come in, I spoke to this person, whatever, they don't get documentation. We're okay with that. I tell people, would you like to send me an email so you have a record of it? That's what I would say there.
I
at
haven't
least.
had this problem in the last 2 years,
But
so.
I thought.
But I would just say to that is I would recommend that, there's an email exchange or something on record so that it's clear. And certainly if we go through that process and we said yes and then no, then that's probably an area where, maybe we could look at exempting that fee and, at least providing us the documentation, which, all you have to do is just open up an area and say, here's my line, type of thing. And just, it's 8 inch and I'm gonna keep it 8 inch.
Well, now you got me thinking after the comment on the culverts under a road. Now I'm worried about the developer who finds a drain tile on his property and decides, he's gonna make it bigger, because you're gonna give him the chance to do that with the 125% increase. Then he's gonna bring it down and tie it into my tile, which is smaller than his. So now I don't think I want the 125, I want a 200% increase on agriculture. I don't want any increase on the development.
It'd be different if it was a district tile though.
Right.
Because the district would have to ultimately sign off
But
on
where
that.
a
They can't
district is
restrict
not
them.
active, that's our biggest problem in this county, where a district is not active. It's like the Wild West, they do whatever they wanna do.
Connecting the mains.
Well, show up Thursday and we'll see what we can do to change that.
Bruce?
Can you bring in an aerial picture, or do you have to, now everything has to be digital
Well,
on their permit?
so our permitting did change to fully digital, so yeah, you would have to create some sort of PDF or JPEG or something, which you can probably do from your phone too, if you wanted to. You know, you can pull up the aerial and just
And then just show
draw
you off of that?
a line, you know, using it or something along. It has to be good enough to where we can understand where your line is in relation to whatever it is that you're doing. That's why an aerial will work, right? Because you can see everything. Well, I don't know if anybody has any other comments. I'm inclined to just keep the 90 to 125 and, you know, bring this up for vote unless there's any other discussion on this particular one.
Yeah, well, I have a comment on the 90 to 125. Why are we removing the adjustment of the adverse slope issue? Because a lot of culverts settle, and then you have it facing the wrong direction.
The adverse slope comment I'm removing because it's requiring that a licensed engineer submits information. So I'm just removing that part. If you want to adjust an adverse slope, I'm removing the idea that you need to have a PE submit documentation if that's what you're doing.
Can we just remove the last sentence?
So do you want me to just put minor adjustment of pipe invert elevations to correct an adverse slope shall be allowed and just cut that off there?
Yeah, shall be allowed without consideration of the resulting increase in pipe capacity, because there was a pipe put in there at some point that should have been put in at the proper slope or whatever slope they were gonna use. And either the contractor didn't put it in right or it settled over time. And now if you wanna go back in, you can't do it under a general permit and replace that pipe.
We can do that.
And then on the very last one, the maintaining of the 90 to 125 capacity, I mean, that addition kind of precludes you from going from a CMP to a HDPE or an RCP. And a lot of places are doing that now, replacing their CMP pipes because they deteriorate. So they want to put in, you know, a plastic or a PVC or something. And those have smooth interiors, so all of a sudden, I mean, you're keeping the same diameter pipe, the same water's coming, but your capacity's going up.
So should we change it to diameter, 90 to 125% of the existing diameter?
Yeah, you can keep the capacity part, but just remove it, or even if it's the same, you know, in-kind replacement was removed, but I mean, it's not in-kind diameter, you know, might be reasonable. If you're gonna increase the diameter, then you should do an analysis, I would think. But if you're gonna just replace it in-kind with a CMP with a HDPE or something, I mean, a lot of times with the roads, we also have requirements for minimum pipe sizes under our main road, our side streets, and our driveways. You know, the minimum diameter required may not have been installed originally. So those are just increased because they weren't done per the specifications to start with.
Okay. What would you?
But, I mean, I guess I would just say,
Recommendation be, I guess, I'm just.
I guess I would just remove that last sentence from E. If we can just replace the pipe, replace the pipe with a cross-sectional area less than 12.6 square feet, then we can come in and put back the pipe we need. I don't know if anybody else has, thoughts.
Any
on
other
that.
thoughts?
I agree with you, because like, if you're saying you're gonna like increase, we're talking about, you're talking about size versus capacity and flow ability, right? Because if you could upsize your culvert and change the material, and then the water would get through there even quicker and potentially impact somebody downstream.
Yeah, but I think maybe you want to put in here somewhere you maintain the same size diameter, I guess. If the cross-sectional area is less than 12.6 square feet and the diameter is maintained. It's just that would allow you to go with a different type of pipe.
Okay, so,
Replacing a CMP with something with a smooth interior.
and shall maintain existing diameter of the culvert, storm sewer, or drain tile. And I guess that gets to potentially Dan's point where someone can upsize at that point.
Right.
Okay.
But do we still have the 90% in there to account for lining? Like, you know what I mean? Because you're technically decreasing the diameter if you're not lining.
So do we need to modify the percentage to 90 to 100%?
You could just say no larger than existing diameter.
No larger than
I
existing?
mean, what's the actual math on 90 to 125%? I mean, because if we're talking square feet, your actual diameter's change is gonna be minimal, right?
It's gonna be very minimal, yeah. I think it's like 3 inches on the top end when I ran the numbers off the top of my head, so it's very,
Yeah, because I
minor.
mean, if we're talking drain tile, you're talking a 4/6, like,
yeah.
usually, right, 4/6, right? The 125% of that, I mean.
You're not gonna get to the next size.
Yeah.
You're not,
No.
yeah, the smaller ones, you're not gonna be able to get to the next size, that's.
No.
That's
And then, and the big ones, I mean, you're gonna change it with the lining, you're gonna be minimal. It's de minimis.
No, I agree, so I guess, what is it that the committee would like to do? Keep it or go to diameter?
Keep it. Keep it. As the guy that does most of the line, keep it, please.
But you're gonna double the capacity if you go from a CMP to HDP. And then you're gonna be doing an analysis on every single culvert, driveway culvert, along, whatever you're doing, just because you wanna replace failing CMPs. I mean, that's a 200% because the capacity doubles due to the roughness, so that's why I just don't, but to his point over here, you don't wanna flood somebody downstream, that's why I would say just maintain the diameter. You can have it the same or less. I mean, if you're making it smaller, then who cares? I mean, you're sending less water downstream.
Okay, so I think it's back to changing capacity to diameter.
Right. I mean, that would work for the ability of municipalities or anybody to switch out these culverts under a general permit.
Okay.
Because at least in the village of Spring Grove, we do that all the time. They want to get CMPs replaced with HDPE or PVC.
Yeah, I think to Tyler's point, it's probably minor, but if that's the committee, do we want to do diameter instead of capacity then for that terminology there? So 90 to 125% of the diameter of the culvert, storm drain tile, pipe. Okay,
So
so I would
the
change,
change would be capacity in the last line to diameter.
yes, in both, in the general permit and the exemption. right, I will move on to the next one. And, so the next one is dredging. We've looked at this one before. The only thing I wanted to maybe touch on is number 4 under dredging. I know before we kind of wanted to indicate maybe a size of stockpiles or a way to do it if they're, drying it, if potentially it's something substantial, like in an ag situation where potentially it's being dried out. So what I was going to propose to the group is instead of throwing a number, because Ernest, this reminds me of the one along that we're dealing with, I forget the road, where they dredged that little pond.
It's a long walk up.
Yeah, so
Covered
they're
Bridge
probably
Trail
not
on
at
the
100.
West corner. What's that?
They're probably not at 100 is my guess, but that's a situation where you'd want the silt fence. So if you do a size component, then it's gonna impact all of the projects. So potentially for number 4, maybe what we want to indicate is if it's part of an agricultural respread, that potentially that could be left long. How long do you guys usually let those stockpiles dry, I guess?
Well, that project we did last year, it was in standing crop, so we left it up all year. And actually, it's still out there frozen. As soon as it gets thawed out, we're gonna spread it out and then till it in.
Okay.
But it's not in a flood area.
So, well, yeah, so in this case, if you wanted to leave it in there, I guess, would 7 days be adequate, or would you move it?
Longer.
Longer.
By the time you get a machine in there, it may take the 7 days to get it in there.
But I mean, you guys pulled it out of the flood hazard area, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Would you normally do that? Would you normally
Well,
try
if
to
the crop
pull it
was there,
farther?
we spread it right away.
Yeah, if the crop was there, we would have spread it
all
and then
depends on
planted
the
it.
time of year that you're doing.
So I guess that's my question, would the 7 days be adequate, or do we need to adjust the language here?
As needed.
It'd be more like a case-by-case basis, but how do you write that?
See stone.
No, that's fine. Well, we can have appropriate soil erosion control protection measures installed as applicable. I don't know if anybody, that kind of gives a gray area there.
Cause like on their project, they're not in the flood hazard area. I mean,
Well, they have portions, but I think you guys
but,
pull
I
it
mean,
out.
generally overall, right, it takes them a year to get the stockpiles dried out and timing and all that stuff and get it out of there. It's not an issue. But if you are pulling wet material out and you're on the bank line, you got nowhere to go with it, maybe that's an instance, I think that's what you're thinking is, okay, well, this one
Yeah,
I have to try.
I don't wanna
and-
see it go back in,
slide back
obviously
in,
you guys
right.
don't either,
Yeah.
right?
But I think that, that can be some, I don't know, common sense on the project.
There's also some logistics. What
Sure.
they use to dredge out the ditch is not customarily the same piece of equipment that they use to spread the material. I mean,
Correct.
so whether you're doing it yourself, whether you're doing it with a contractor, there's usually a time delay. Just get this machine out of here, haul this machine in, because they don't bring them both at the same time. They're just trying to be efficient. So usually there's a period of time. And then add to it a farmer's schedule. I mean, it's do what you can now. Oh my gosh, this needs planting, this needs, whatever process, this needs harvesting. So usually there's a time delay by the very nature of the project and the field of enterprise that's doing it. So I don't know that needs to be put in there. Drying time, if you want to go slightly differently, I know when there was wet material that had to be dried, customarily a 30-day time frame was put to it. Now, is all 30 days needed? No. How many days of rain are you going to have? It's so.
I'm in agreement with all of that. I just want to provide clarity, because if we leave it as the language is, it might, a farmer might think I need to put up silt fence when maybe they don't. I just don't know what this is where I'm looking for some help.
So this is gonna be on a GP1 permit.
This is gonna be on a general
We're
permit.
pulling dredging out of under other maintenance activities and throwing it under a GP1.
Technically, I don't know why, dredging previously, was exempted. Generally speaking, you know, most areas you're dredging are flood hazard. There are some that maybe they're not considered flood hazard, depending on the size and everything, but.
That's the great legal question that was posed.
Well, so that's
By nature,
why.
you have to be.
That's why we changed it. We changed the exempt definition under other maintenance slightly, where now if you are removing spoils, you know, dirt, that's where we saw dredging. If you're cleaning out your ditch, there's branches and debris and things like that, you should be able to move that out. But the second you're scooping up material, spoiled material, and actually digging it out, I think that was kind of in our minds, the difference there, right? If you're going off the top and just skimming and just trying to get some debris and brush that's maybe overgrown, et cetera, then we didn't think that that would, you know, be dredging necessarily.
It assumes it's applied
It doesn't track.
as a soil, not a liquid.
Sure.
Well, I'm just saying, if it's liquid, it's gonna go wherever it goes.
Yeah.
And then you're gonna want some sort of perimeter control.
So I think because the dredging is in the GP1 permit, the way that you have it noted, you're gonna have it all mapped, right? The project, hey, I wanna clean this piece of ditch, right? I'm gonna sit on the high side and pull it all out. Okay, well then your spoils can go here. Or I'm gonna sit on the low side because this is my side, the neighbor's side's the other. Okay, well then you're gonna have to do something with your stockpiles, right?
Potentially.
Right.
Right, yes, yes.
Because
If you're on the high
of a
side.
GP1 permit, I think that at that point, you can look at it as the department and go, you know, based on topography, where you're going, time of year, you know, all these questions, right?
Yeah, that's why I'm saying maybe as needed or as applicable might be the best way to get around that. And that's why again, we'd like to, like, Bruce, you guys came in, I'm dredging this, I'm gonna put my stockpiles here, okay, no problem. Right, we had that discussion, it took all of, I don't know, 5 minutes for you guys at the time. So yeah, exactly what you said, we would look at that and say, hey, this is not in the flood hazard, go ahead and place your material there. That's the idea at the end of the day. But we understand you want to respread potentially in areas that are flood hazard, which is allowed up to that one inch or so, 2 inch mark. So, okay, so I'll put as applicable then.
Can I ask one thing? Because I don't know if I'm
Sure.
reading this differently than everybody else. Because it says temporary stockpiles remaining in place more than 7 days shall not be obstructed with flood flows. I mean, they should never be obstructive to flood flows, right? Like, so you're saying somebody can block drainage for a week?
Right, we don't want that, yeah, so wherever they're putting them as well, we want to make sure they're not in potential areas that is like a ditch or like through topo, you know it's coming through this 10-foot area, yes, please don't plop it in that 10-foot area or it's definitely gonna wash back in.
Right, well, what I'm saying is it should never go there. I don't even think there should be a time limit associated with, because right now it's saying you can block it for 7 days.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I guess,
We just switch around.
well,
Yeah.
it's not,
Yeah.
so sorry, I guess it should be an and, so it should be if it's remaining there more than 7 days, and if you're gonna have a stockpile, it should not be obstructed. So it's not both, it's not giving you a 7 day, but it should not read as you're getting 7 days of free stockpile placement without any repercussions. It should not read like that.
Right, that's what I just want to make sure, however it's worded, that we're not
Okay,
temporarily allowing blockage of flow.
Again, if you're coming on a GP1 permit, right, I don't know that you need remaining in place more than 7 days at all. Right, as long as there's a pathway. I have to have breaks in my stockpile. I can't put an 8-foot berm of spoils,
yeah,
right?
we have to be considerate of other projects, not ag. So this is getting into a situation where if someone, for whatever reason, in-ground pool, right? They're doing construction on in-ground pool, it slopes down towards the river, and for whatever reason, we want them to have erosion control. Now, if they're like, if they get delayed and say, hey, we're not gonna be able to haul this away right away, then that erosion control measure should stay in place.
But isn't this just under Q dredging?
Yeah. So then it's, so that wouldn't be dredging, you're right. My apologies.
An HOA pond.
An HOA pond, thank you.
I see those a lot, the HOA ponds.
Yes.
Did you say dredging was exempted out of this at one point?
It wasn't.
Yes, it was saying, the language was saying you need a dredging permit, and then there was language that's saying that it's exempt under, well, you can see the striked out red.
And that went back to our discussion on, we're getting permits from the FSA and NRCS office along with Army Corps of Engineers. Why are we getting tripped up with the county here?
Well, again, local permitting, we have our requirements along with state and federal, and if state and federal require certain things, then you would have to go to all of them. We don't have any agreement that says if you get an Army Corps permit, you don't need a permit from McHenry County. I don't know any municipality or other jurisdiction that does that has those type of agreements. What we try to do is make it easy and say, here's what Army Corps is requiring, we're gonna do the exact same thing.
That was one of our other points at that time.
Yeah, so this follows Army Corps and IDNR. These points follow Army Corps and IDNR.
And that's removing that a half-mile requirement for the permit.
Yeah, that one I don't know. We
Yeah.
tried to find that one. We did not see that in IDNR Army Corps, so we struck that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because we ran into that years
Yeah.
ago.
We-
Where
yeah.
we'd get a approval for an Army Corps permit that was 4 miles long, and then get tied up and go, well, you need 8 permits. Okay, great.
So yeah, that to your point, we tried to make it as streamless or as streamlined as possible from that perspective. Okay. All right, hearing no other
So
discussion.
we're adding as
Applicable.
applicable.
Correct. I have these down, so I'll run through these. I'd like, when we vote, I'll go over them again, so. All right, last one here. Maintenance of existing roads and bridges, so this was the one that really delayed everything. Basically, mostly dealing with the townships. We came to an agreement for this, so again, information that you guys have received. The big change is under the maintenance. We added has been reviewed and approved by a professional engineer or the McHenry County Planning and Development Stormwater Division. So we made that change. The townships, we advised them to come in and use that service. If they feel that they're good, then I guess that's on them. And then if we find them in violation, they'll just have to make the corrections, and I got the thumbs up from that group for that. So that was the agreement there, essentially. So if no one has any discussion items for this one, I'd like to just go back through them real quick and, okay. So just going back through before we entertain any motions. Under the minor modification for culverts, under item 5, we will keep this sentence, minor adjustment of pipe invert elevations to correct an adverse slope shall be allowed without consideration of the resulting increase in pipe capacity. We're going to strike the calculation portion still. And we're going to change the word capacity to diameter, so it will read, shall maintain 90 to 125% of the diameter of the existing culvert, storm sewer, or drain tile. The change for dredging is to add under item 4 that temporary stockpiles remaining in place 7 days and shall be non-obstructed to foot flows and have appropriate soil erosion control protection measures installed as applicable. So we will add as applicable and make that sentence coherent there with the ands and the commas.
And restore and it's short now.
Sorry, which one?
So it's, in place more than 7 days and shall be.
Right. Then I have another and there, so we'll make sure it's a comma. All right. With those changes, do I hear a motion? Or do I have any discussion?
One question,
Sure.
D at the top of page 14. What is, under 1, it says does not increase the surface elevation. And on the bottom one, it talks that part's been crossed out. I just wanted to know exactly what this means.
So what it means is for GP1 for maintenance of existing roads and bridges in flood hazard areas, we'd like to maintain the existing elevations. So that's what that D is for 1.
Okay, that's in a flood hazard.
It's in a flood hazard area. The exemption then would be outside of flood hazard area. We removed any language to the thickness because to your point and in talking with the townships, the existing roads might be better off having a 4-inch overlay, let's say.
Okay.
So but we threw in that should be reviewed either by a professional engineer or the township that doesn't have those resources can come to us and we can confirm for them that yes, feel free to make the overlay changes that you would need.
Okay.
All right, so do I hear a motion to have this move forward to MCSC with the discussed changes?
So
Moved by Steve,
I'll second.
second by Jody. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the ayes have it. Okay, moving on. Got about 11, so let's try to keep us on pace. We'll probably get stuck, but, all right. Bringing back 5.3, the post-construction BMP language. So we had that vote last time that discussed for table 3. We went ahead and included both the 10 vehicles per day or the 25 parking stalls. That was the main change there. I know some of you weren't present for that, so I don't know if there's any additional discussion here on this section, or I can just go through a quick summary if you guys want. Yes.
I got a question.
Okay, Mike?
So, just to refresh, this was, we took a vote on this, and this had the most votes, but this was proposed by Scott, I think, right, as an option to have one or the other?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct, yeah.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Yes. He was the one that broke through.
Good job, Scott.
Or are we gonna put 10 vehicle average in there, or are you gonna leave that alone?
We moved away from the average.
I think we
concept.
were, yeah, I think we were just looking per day type of.
With the average, as I recall, it added levels of complexity because then you have to show your math, and I think the group had moved away from that.
And this should be something like, again, the 10 vehicles per day, that's something that if you're doing a development, normally you have to provide that information to the health department because you gotta size your well, you gotta size your septic system. So I think that's where we're looking at it as, okay, there's gonna be a decent amount of traffic coming through here that potentially that vehicle use, there should be some kind of best management practice just from the runoff of vehicles, the hydrocarbons, et cetera. And the way this is supposed to work again is, just gonna go through it before I vote, is that we're looking to consolidate our runoff volume reduction and our water quality to kind of identify certain activities that would qualify. So the idea here is an applicant would provide us a narrative. It's kind of a similar situation to any kind of conditional use permitting. You just provide that narrative to kind of let us know what's happening. For the ACT folks, in this case, Dan, if you're following NRCS guidelines, FSA, FDA, sorry, I don't remember all the acronyms, you can provide this that information to say, hey, I'm following these guidelines. And, we've brought up the idea of tank storage for chemicals and things like that. If you're meeting USDA, et cetera, you can provide that information to us and that'll satisfy that requirement. So you're not having to put in any BMP. For those that aren't, we're just looking for that narrative. The table's just supposed to be a helpful guide as to kind of help someone when they're applying to use that to kind of understand what pollutant they're potentially looking at. And then the treatment options are defined, they're defined designs in the Illinois Urban Manual, thank you, and also the Crystal Lake Watershed Design Manual as well. And then applicants are free to make other proposals to us. We're not saying no to it, but we obviously need that documentation. So from there, then there is.
Can I ask a silly question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Pardon the ignorance. When is the BMP needed?
So the BMP would potentially be needed. So this excludes general permits. So this would also exclude single-family residences, but it could extend to a minor development that might be 10,000 square feet. And here's why: we get a lot of applications for landscaping uses. A lot of the times they're creating storage areas where they're bringing materials on, and those materials, we might need to make sure that they're not. We don't know what they are sometimes that they're bringing in. That might be adjacent to a creek. We don't want that stuff flowing into, our downstream neighbor or something like that. So it could apply to smaller developments from that perspective.
No, understood, because normally right now, those kind of issues are dealt with, their conditions on the conditional use permit, right? Through P&D?
No, I was just giving that as an example that people provide those type of narratives, but yeah, like that comes in.
Right? But now this is your way of having the same conditions.
Pretty much, yeah.
On the permit side rather than on the use side.
Correct, but I would use that opportunity to let them know that, hey, we've got some concerns potentially for the material you're bringing in. You're gonna need to think about providing a BMP. I can provide that information ahead of time for them so they can kind of think about that. But no, it would be like, if the farmer is creating a huge pole barn, or, a pretty large pole barn in the middle of their property, they're doing a driveway. This is eliminating the need for that BMP because they can just indicate, well, that, I'm storing equipment in there, I use it 2-3 times a year or whatever, for these different type of operations. So the need isn't there to require them to use a BMP. That's what we were afraid of if we went with just like 5,000 square feet of impervious, you need a BMP.
Right.
We're trying to drive at what is the actual pollutant or the root cause that we're trying to avoid, so. So that was the intent behind the language. So if there's no discussion on this, I would like to entertain a motion to go ahead and vote this over to MCSC. If there's no other discussion. Do I hear a motion? All right, first from Al. Do we have a second?
If Spring will allow me, I'll second.
Okay, for a second from Ernest. All those in favor, please vote, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the ayes have it. All right, so new business, moving into number 6. Or I'm sorry, not yet, 5.4, stormwater management facilities. This is an item that we started to discuss last time. So I included the full section from the ordinance for you guys for stormwater management facilities. We're focusing on the downstream adequate capacity. The idea is that a large development's gonna come in, create a detention basin, concentrate that flows and release it onto a neighboring property. And the concern is that that neighboring property potentially doesn't have the infrastructure or the point of release, although it will be, maintaining drainage patterns, will now with that concentrated flow be creating an issue downstream. So the requirement was that the developer would try to work with that downstream neighbor. And if they can't come to an agreement, the old language indicated that there would be this process of a surety that would be provided to the enforcement officer. We have had that situation come up and have found that the vagueness of this surety language is making it really difficult for us to feel confident to execute it. This was taken from King County, and speaking to King County, they would actually do the work themselves, so this language makes sense because then they would.
That's not accurate. I talked to Deanne this morning. They're not gonna pay for, they're paying a drainage, Tom Huddleston.
To do it. Okay, well, they're paying someone else to do it. Either way.
I was under the impression that they had a department doing it, she goes, no, or not, or
They're, okay,
he's getting paid by whoever.
I guess, but the way that they made it sound to me is they're part of that procurement process.
They don't have a process in place like you guys have here.
No, they have a long-standing contract with Huddleston. They've had it for decades.
Yeah, so whether it's an agreement that they have, basically they're gonna be the ones that are driving the work. Whereas here, as I understand it, the intent was for the county not to be involved. It would be the downstream owner that does the work themselves, and then there'd be a pot of money to reimburse them. Right, so.
We wanted the right to have our own contractor do that work versus the developer's contractors. Which is a benefit to them because we can do it cheaper with our contractors.
And that would be fine. I guess in the grand scheme of things, the way that this is written is that the engineer would propose a plan for that outfall. If you as the downstream neighbor agree to that, then we would issue a permit out. Whoever completes the work, whether it's developer, et cetera, between the agreement of you guys, that's up to you, obviously. And that can be something that you negotiate with that person, like, yeah, I like this plan, but I want to do the work, for example. We don't. Yes.
To that end, Stein, I know when we pull a bond for any project, it's with the intent that if the current entity does not do it correctly, we don't want them, their contractors, or anyone else involved. We want cash, and we go and have someone else do it because there's a conflict of interest in our mind.
Sure.
They've already done it their way, so how much are they gonna change to say, well, our way was wrong? So if it helps any, that's at least the logic we play, like when we issue a permit and we say, okay, post the bond, and we've only had to cash one once in the time I've been there, but that's the logic, because I went through the whole logic, and it's like, well, don't we give them a chance to fix it? No. They're done, they're out, go to somebody else.
For that reason, we don't want to do the security at all. So that's, I was just giving you guys just the quick summary of what's in here now. We'd like to move away from the security and propose something different to make this work. So what I tried to do was give a quick flow chart. I'm not the best at this, okay? But for discussion purposes, here was kind of we tried to take all the concepts and simplify this down. And obviously there's going to be some caveats, and I'll touch on that, but this was hopefully going to drive the discussion so the first step is the applicant / engineer needs to determine if there's adequate capacity, if it exists or not. So that's the first step, right? From there, if there isn't adequate capacity, so this isn't draining to some ditch, or even if it is and it doesn't have capacity, then maybe additional modifications need to be made. What I wanted to do here was that if there's improvements that are required, I wanted to set a little bit of a hierarchy here. One, with the following: 1 being infiltration, 2 being a separate pipe, and then 3 being a ditch/swell. If the person goes to infiltration, then really you don't have any water leaving the site. It's all infiltrating, so therefore that's basically checking off all components. One of the other situations that have been brought up is, what if you're dealing with multiple owners and the middle owner says no, the 2 outside say yes? What do you do? Infiltration in that hierarchy helps, again, deal with that situation. If you, go ahead, Ernest.
If you and Spring will let me speak. On the infiltration issue, you may have to watch out, because if you're trying to keep it all on site and infiltrate it onto the site that's developing, a health department has certain parameters that click in regarding dry wells and sticking it all in the ground on one spot. So you might be stepping on some other toes.
Well, again, that's the hierarchy, if you can do it. The soils might not warrant, the soils might not warrant for it either, or the cost of replacing existing soils to get to an infiltration layer might be too high as well. It might make the project not feasible. So there's an element of feasibility to this, but that's kind of what we'd like to see happen, is explore the option of infiltration. Can it work? Then go to a separate piped system, then go to a ditch or swale as a preference. Now, from that, we would, P&D staff, so one thing that isn't as clear in the ordinance is it says that the upstream neighbor needs to send notifications to the downstream neighbor. We'd like to bring that in-house to P&D to make sure that they're getting the most accurate information and that everybody's on the same page. So if there's any kind of revisions made, plus it gives staff the ability to know that the upstream neighbor has sent the correct stuff to the downstream neighbor. Otherwise, we have no way of knowing this, and that's part of the issue that we found ourselves with the current stuff. So P&D staff would send that information to the downstream neighbor to make them aware and give them an ability to request feedback, ask questions, be a part of that process. To Dan's point, we understand that the downstream neighbor wants to be involved with this and work towards a solution. Obviously, they're part of this. From there, we would review and again, share that information with the engineer and the applicant, and let them know kind of where things sit. If we can have the 2 parties come to an agreement, then the final changes would be approved and added to the permit. Again, we would send that information to the downstream owner to make them aware. And basically at that point, when the permit is issued, if they want it, now if they say we don't want the improvement, like the situation that we have, it goes to having to do that surety. So instead, what we'd prefer to do is, if they want that improvement, create a form that requests, hey, we want to move forward with this improvement. So it still gives them that time frame, and that idea is still there if they want to do it. But now it removes the idea of having to need some kind of security. There will be a condition on the permit that says the downstream improvements can't move forward until that request has been made by the downstream owner. If the downstream owner doesn't want to have those improvements, then the permit just expires like normally you would. So the only thing we're changing here is we're moving away from the security. We're actually putting it in place in the permit and having a request process by the downstream owner. And then, we can, for the last part there, I just threw this in that we can have some kind of like within 6 months of expiration, or that time frame component can be looked at. So this essentially achieves all of, I think, the initial ideas of notifying the downstream neighbor, having improvements if needed, and allowing that person to be a part of that process. If they say no, the permit moves forward, still gives them an opportunity to come back and say, and change their mind within the time period of that permit, essentially.
So it's got a 6-month expiration on the, no, but I mean,
Yeah,
so that way the developer's not hanging out there.
Right, I just didn't want, like, it's a 3-year permit, usually if the guy comes in 5 days prior to expiration, says, you know what, I want it, that's, so that's why I threw in 6 months, but we could do a year, then that 2-year process is there, but yeah, to your point, I just didn't want to hamstring someone to come in and do it.
Got it all built, everything out of there.
Right, so they've already unmobilized. Now, if, to your point, Dan, if you want to use your own contractor to do that, then potentially that's not an issue. And what we can do from P&D staff is extend that permit if it's, you're waiting till that final minute to pull that trigger. We'll just go ahead and do an extension for that downstream work. It won't be additional fees. It's all there. It's not like it's a revision or anything. And allow you to do that work if you wanted to use your own contractor. And again, that would be something that you can negotiate with the upstream owner. The idea of having the upstream owner involved is that they would be paying for that work. If you use your own contractor, obviously the upstream owner would have to agree to pay them or use them as part of that. So we don't necessarily want to be involved in that. You guys can kind of figure out those details. But this eliminates the whole bond, security, is the county involved, who's holding it, is the money enough after 2 years, et cetera. Puts it into current situation, still achieves everything, but kind of simplifies the process, in my opinion. Makes it a little bit more clear as well. So that's the general idea. So now for feedback. Ernest, go ahead.
And the number 2 and 3 of your second rectangle.
Yeah.
Are you going to require easements be placed on the downstream property? The reason I mention it is, okay, so fine, everybody works everything out. 10 years later, the farmer wants to send his kid to Harvard, so he's gonna sell the farm.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, they sell it, and the first guy comes in and goes, oh, that ditch right there, forget that, I'm moving it over there, and everything gets screwed up on the development. So it's like, wait, what about?
Yeah, I think for that reason, some easements would have to be put in place.
Okay, so the downstream owner would have to not only agree to the process, but also encumbrances on his property.
Well, and through that easement process, that's where we would give them the ability to, figure that out. Do they want to give access to the upstream owner? They're not. Who's responsible for the maintenance, et cetera?
Okay, so that is part of the thinking.
It's part of the SMO currently regardless. If you have more than one property that's being serviced by a stormwater management system, whether it's a pipe, et cetera, yeah, we don't want, these 2 neighbors are great, you mentioned it, this, they sell the property, new guy comes in and he's like, screw all of this. Yeah, that's gonna be a problem, right? The other thing is, if you have that situation where you have multiple owners and one says no, I think we would ask the engineer to see if there's something feasible that can be done. Maybe it's a pipe, then it daylights and then it's picked up. If not, then potentially what we would say is we can only do downstream improvements to this property. After that, because of this neighbor, it's just going to continue to do what it does. So if there's a neighbor that's throwing a wrench in the system, then we would say, go talk to your neighbor about it. There's no other feasible solution. This is the best that can be done given the circumstances.
I don't agree with that. If I got an idiot next to me who doesn't understand that he's devaluing his land, and that same water is gonna do the same thing to my land, I need to be protected from his stupidity. So when that water hits my property, then it needs to go underground and go to the outlet.
Which if it's feasible, we would do that. So it would skip the middle person, right? And we would do that. I just can't say that in every situation you'd be able to have improvements. If you've got 3 owners, the middle one is saying no, that you can do improvements on the first one, not do improvements on the second one, and then continue to do improvements on the third one. I don't know what the topo looks like, right? And we can't force someone to go on their property to say yes.
If it's any help, Brian, I know when we were researching the drainage districts, part of the drainage district records are actually contained in the courts. And the reason they're contained in the courts, there were just that. Intermediate owners that said, no, I'm not gonna let you do it. So the whole thing became a court action to say, yeah, you are, because we're gonna have a continuous flow across these 10 pieces of property. And so you could, I mean, using what Dan said, using that history, I could see a real entanglement court case, and I'd hate to have it be, and we're also joining in P&D, and everybody come into the courtroom and let's start fighting for years. Because some of those court cases took years to resolve, and I don't think you want to be a party to such things.
I don't, that's why I would feel that the Illinois drainage law would be the appropriate place for that. But as P&D, we can only indicate that if there is a feasible solution to this, we will pursue it. If it's not, because of that owner and the way that it works, I don't see how we can say you have to do this, you don't know what you're talking about, you're gonna get flooded.
I like your logic, but in deference to the attorney that's in the room, but going back to Al's thing, everything was good with a neighbor until an attorney got involved, and all of a sudden it was like, no. Well, that kind of puts a monkey wrench in the whole game.
Well, and we, you know, in that one specifically, they have an agreement, it's just the way that the SMO is written, I can't move forward without that surety, without that security. So I'm trying to eliminate that.
I understand.
To, you know, make it easier, but go ahead, Tyler, it seems like you wanted to at least voice your.
Well, I want to go back to another concern, where that engineer is going to use infiltration. That could give them the right to say that my land has sufficient infiltration, and I'll argue with them about that all day long. So I want, when I come in for the third box there to meet with you guys, if I don't agree with that, it needs to be.
Well, he wouldn't be able to take advantage of anything on your property if he's gonna do infiltration. You can't say.
That's what they're doing now. It's the natural flow, you gotta take the water. That's not the natural flow of how it used to come.
Well, that's, again, that would get worked out and it would all get directed to an infiltration basin on their property.
So when you say infiltration, you're talking on the developer's property?
Correct. No. Unless you want an infiltration basin. Like I said, that's why that third comment, if that's what you want, then we can, you know, that would be that communication and coordination.
I don't like it.
So, but yes, the infiltration basin would be solely on the developer's property. The stormwater would get collected there. Obviously, we can only regulate up to the 100-year 24-hour storm. If we get something, you know, more intense, that's where there will be an overflow. We're gonna have it, you know, be spread out. That's where it will continue to kind of drain it the way that it is. But in those situations, what you should have is you should have the storage and the infiltration, so it should reduce, you know, the potential flooding impacts from a just standard detention basin with an outlet that's potentially, I mean, we also look at kind of what the tributary area is, and the example that we have currently, it's really not changing. It's already coming into a kind of defined swale that's centralized. It's going to a detention basin. So really, this is one that, you know, isn't taking 80 acres that is flowing in all different directions and consolidating into one. So every situation is a little bit different, but that's what I would propose with the hierarchy and kind of this idea of notification, allowing the neighbors to work with it, issuing the permit, having a condition, and then the downstream neighbor can come back and request that. Give them that ability to still do that at that time. And then, like I said, if it's multiple neighbors, we would look at if there's a feasible solution to exclude that middle neighbor, then we'll take that. If not, then design it can only be feasible for as far as it can be taken. That's essentially what we would have to move forward with.
So to protect the developer and the department, I think that there needs to be enough notification to the neighbor that is documented. right? And
So-
like in your last one, that like,
All downstream owners
Right.
affected.
right, to all downstream, but that at some point, right, that your expiration's coming, you're waiving, and have waiver language in there, because too often, you know, Joe's the neighbor, he says, no, I'm not gonna do it because I don't like the development. He dies, sells the place, somebody new comes in and goes, oh, I'm getting flooded by this thing up the top of the hill, and, you know, help me, lawyer, right? And then you come back and you go, well, I did the development on it, we went through all this process, now I've got a court case, everybody's gonna spend 80 grand to go, what else did you want me to do? You had the opportunity, the previous guy had the opportunity, and you missed it.
Right.
So I think there needs to be some waiver language in there to go, if you don't want us coming through, that's fine, but now you're as is whereas, you know,
Yep.
taking the water.
We haven't drawn anything up. Again, I didn't want to get too far.
No,
So I just,
right.
but absolutely, that's something actually that we've done right now is we drafted a waiver signature, so we can move the current situation forward.
Yeah.
But yes, that's absolutely.
You know what I mean?
100%.
Because
Yes.
otherwise, the
Right.
developer, I couldn't spend $1 million up the road to know that 5 years down the road, when we tell them they're gonna get flooded, they get flooded, and I gotta fight with that.
Absolutely.
That's all.
Quick question.
Yes.
So by the time, just in terms of process, by the time we hit step 5, we're assuming that the middle owner said no and they had to redesign around that middle owner? And that's the set of plans that the permit is issued for? Exempting that, because you could almost, I almost see there being 2 sets of plans, like, are you approving the ultimate preferred method, and then if this guy doesn't come through, then you do the alternate?
No, so potentially depending on that complication, then yes, like if you're gonna do a standard release, but if you incorporate the downstream owner, that would look a little bit different for kind of that outfall or that connection, then potentially yes, and it would be conditioned that, you know, the permit would move, or that part of the downstream improvements would only move forward with that request, so potentially yes. You could have a slight tweak to the outfall design based on what that downstream neighbor says.
But I mean, I think it could be kind of drastically different, like they may have to take measures that wouldn't be easily incorporated in if the guy downstream just suddenly signed on. Do you know what I mean?
Well, that's where at least we'd like to come to that design, so you're not designing it last minute, so it would kind of come to fruition. So you would try to do infiltration, then we would propose the downstream pipe. And so if the neighbor, you know, that's where the waiver form comes in. If the neighbor just doesn't want it and is not looking to engage in any of that and not be a part of it, then yeah, that makes it difficult, right? So we want to avoid that, so have some of that waiver language in there. What we would then do is, you know, do our best within that hierarchy to say a separate pipe is probably the way to go, here's the best route. Have that in the plans as kind of downstream improvements and be conditioned that if the downstream neighbor changes their mind, we can go back and accomplish that. So hopefully it's gonna minimize, you know, the changes or having to do drastic changes to the point where the engineer knows what they're gonna be doing. And maybe it's a slight modification to that outfall if needed at all, because maybe it's still a normal outfall release, right? And it's, because it still has to go another 25, 30 feet to the neighbor. Maybe there's some kind of inlet or standing pipe that picks it up there. So from that perspective, you would pick up those plans from that standing pipe, and those are the downstream improvements. They can both exist. The downstream neighbor said no at the time, we permit it, and then they can request that later. But, you know, if they waive their ability to be part of that solution, then, you know, we can't sit there and wait for them, because they might be dragging their feet because they just don't want the development to go through. Maybe they don't like their neighbor, I don't know what it is. So we give them that opportunity. If they waive that, then I don't know what more you can offer someone, right?
Yeah, let's do it. Maybe I'm missing something, I've been trying to pay attention to it. let us say there's a 40-acre tract being developed. And let us say I own the downstream 40-acre tract. So somehow that water has to pass through whatever means. And if I, for whatever reason, simply say no, I mean, just keep stomping my feet, do a Rumpelstiltskin and say, no, how can you force me to sign a waiver? And how can you force a plan on me if I just say, no, I don't want to do it, I don't want to work. I know I'm being obstinate, but I can easily see this. I'm like, so what do you got?
It would be, so that's why I don't want to have everybody sign anything or go to someone to sign anything. So as part of the process, we're going to send this notification out, certified mail, and the language will probably read that if we don't have a response, and maybe we send a follow-up notification, if we have received no response, we're going to take that as you waiving your right to be part of this process, right? And you're basically indicating that you don't want any downstream improvements at that point.
I now understand your process. I think you might be, how do I put this nicely? You might be out of line in what a layperson knows. Okay, as a dumb example, totally different. I hold, from decades ago, a real estate license in the state of Illinois, so I'm a realtor. Anybody talks to me about property, anything, casual, whatever, my first words out of my mouth have to be, I'm a licensed realtor in the state of Illinois, because I have a different level of knowledge and understanding than laymen. Somebody gets a letter and it says, okay, there's a development going to the north. Let's say it's certified letter return receipt. It says, okay, there's development going to the north and drainage will be coming onto your property, or drainage may be coming onto your property, you need to deal with it. I could see the average layman saying, no, I don't give a damn, and throw it aside. And now a second one comes, he throws it one more time aside, and all of a sudden, that's it, he's stuck. And I could see him going to one of the brethren lawyers and saying, foul, I had no understanding of what the hell that
Claiming
meant.
ignorance is acceptable?
What's that?
You're claiming that ignorance is
Absolutely. Oh, I've seen it be used as an acceptable plea. And I'm just saying, I could see all of a sudden, again, your department getting embroiled because they'd say, well, I followed the letter of the law. And someone's saying, well, who the heck wrote this law? Because this doesn't help Joe Layman.
Well, that's part of writing this, right?
So you might want to look at the drainage code again, because there is the ability for off-site or upstream owners to access downstream owners' land to lay drainage.
Yes, there is that. That's why, like, the state's attorney would look at that
Yeah.
and advise, hey, you don't need to do anything. It's already covered. I think part of the issue, though, that we have is when someone potentially has a valid point, it's kind of hard to sit there and be like, go hire a lawyer.
Right.
So we're just trying to help put the process in place that's going to help a project move forward. And whether or not someone comes to us, you know,
I understand you're not in an easy spot, and although I seem to be just the problem child, I understand. I'm just saying, I don't want to see us create a system that's just totally flawed from the start, and then like, well, we created a system, so what?
So where did this outrun come from? Because I thought that we had to engineer the site so that it released at the same rate that it would in the natural course of drainage, and that covered everybody, and everybody went home happy.
It would, but the problem now is if you have 80 acres and some is flowing in different areas, and now you're concentrating it to one point, it's the lower flows, the 2-year to the 10-year, that is now producing more in that spot because you've concentrated everything.
It's volume.
I wasn't a part of these discussions, but that's what was told to me, is that when, especially from the ag community, when you do that, now you tend to generate an area that's going to be wetter, and you lose that viability, or the growth potential goes down, or the crop potential in that area goes down. And that was, and it could happen just in general if you're a neighbor and it's now coming at your septic system or whatever. So it doesn't necessarily have to be related to that. So this is a way to then say to the developer, hey, you have to try to do something to convey the water through there to try to minimize that impact.
So you weren't at that meeting when we met with Jody from Kane County. And their ordinance is having these developers carry their water to the nearest outlet, rather than dumping it on the neighbor.
Yeah, right.
That's what started it.
And I get it, there's awful lot of taking and non-eminent domain power that seems to be at play, right? Which then you're going, well, you can agree to it. Well, if you don't agree, then we're taking that as a waiver. And Farron's point, I don't know, I see a lot of heartache. And maybe Kane doesn't have the same,
No, they do.
maybe
They
they're
go
not
through-
getting
they
sued
go-
over it, I don't know.
They go through the same issues and they hope that they don't have to get to the point where
Yeah.
they actually force those improvements or collect that security.
So then you see neighbors that can have control over a development based on just their drainage outflow.
Right, so if they say no, that's the idea the language currently doesn't give me much of, like, how do I move forward, right? So right now, what we're dealing with is the communications of the downstream owner saying, no, I don't have anything in writing. We Al created something, it wasn't sufficient enough to kind of like really bullet point say no. For us to then say, we're now at the security phase. So it's not outlined how I get to that point and what should be included as an acceptable waiver. Now, we are trying to get sign off from that downstream neighbor, but in future situations, if they're just, don't want the development, they can say, oh, I'll do this, I'll do that, stall, we don't, now I'm trying to seek signatures. So I'm trying to avoid any situations where I'm seeking a signature, and if the downstream owner wants something, it's in place where they would have to come and request that. So I'm no longer in a position, or other municipalities are in a position where you gotta go hunt the signature down. Because that's what basically this is requiring, otherwise how would, to your points, oh, you went to the security phase? Well, I never said no, even though you could have had a phone call or whatever, right? You can find ways around that or legally, even though you had a conversation. So it's building this section out better so it's clear and has that process in place.
Am I allowed a slight joke? If in 5 years from now, the commercials are, come to Lerner and Rowe to have your drainage issue solved, I'll know where it started at least. I'll have a start point, so that's good. Good. This was just general idea. I know it's kind of basic stuff and it has to get vetted, but if, I feel like this is probably our best way forward. And I can then spend time to look at this deeper and provide some language, get it vetted, come back to you guys so you can see what it looks like from a structural perspective and flow. Maybe we can dig into some of this a little bit more. If that works.
Couple of questions.
Yes.
Just sort of related to this, let's get to the point. In the current ordinance, how long is the performance guarantee?
2 years.
2 years.
But it doesn't specify when that 2 years begins.
Okay.
So that's another issue that I have on my end. Is it when the original permit is in, when that permit is over, which could be inconsistent?
And the expiration date on any given stormwater?
3 years.
Because the way I look at this flow chart is the 4 boxes on the left, the 2 on the right. The 2 on the right get staff involved in this process. They're kind of more of a middleman to communicate with the downstream owners.
Yeah, we're trying to use more of our zoning procedure for conditional use processes because we think it's a much more effective tool and it gives us the surety that the upstream neighbor is communicating what they need to communicate with the downstream neighbor.
Yeah. Well, I would agree that having staff involved, it's a little easier to communicate to the downstream owners, because if you just get the developers and the developers' engineers on it, they are going to belittle the downstream and bully. This way, at least serving as the middleman, I think it works, would be able to communicate much more clearly. But then when you get to box 6, the way I look at it is this, the security that you're trying to avoid gets built into permit.
As a
So it's
condition.
already there.
Right.
Because in box 5, that's where you're factoring in the cost of the downstream is now part of the overall project, security, and you just can keep that as long as you need to.
Yeah, I think that part works well. It's just getting to that, part that even, like I said, in the current language, the whole notification component, it doesn't indicate, how that should be done. It just basically says that your downstream neighbor shall be contacted or notified. So in the case that we had, they were notified, they indicated they don't want the downstream improvements, but we didn't have a clear and precise waiver saying, yeah, now I can move forward to the surety, to the security portion.
And if you have it built into the overall project security, that could get extended out multiple years. So you're gonna hold on to that for it could be
Yeah,
5,
and then-
6 years, depending on the.
Well, and then we have
project.
concerns depending on, if it's a letter of credit, those are easier to execute. It doesn't specify that it needs to be that. They could decide to go with the bond, which is much harder. There's a lot of built-in. Once it goes to the bond company or the bank for the letter of credit, they have no downside of finding a gray area to then not give the money. And that's our concern is what if then I need to pull the money and pay someone and I can't do that? That would be an even bigger nightmare. And so that's why we want to move away from that and just find this process. So, I mean, if there's no other comments, it sounds like this is somewhat a good starting point that maybe staff, I'll try to, work through that to get you guys some language, and we can then make changes, adds to it, et cetera, look at it deeper. Okay, go ahead and do that then. All right. Okay. And one last item on the agenda here, and I know we're running past the 2 hours, so if anybody does need to, have engagements, I understand. Well, actually, a couple of items, but moving to new business 6.1, one of the board members on the MCSC just asked for the impervious threshold to detention. I didn't have a lot of the background. I think some TAC members here were a part of that. So they were just looking at some questions as to why the 20 should be higher. And I think, I told her, I'll bring it in and have that discussion. I do want to point out that although 20 is the trigger, you do get up to 1 acre. Obviously, with that first exemption, you can get up to 1 acre. It's built in, though, that you can't just put an acre of new impervious, adjacent to your neighbor and flood out their septic or their home type of thing. You still have to show that that's not going to impact someone. But then there's the exemption for the 5% for larger developments, which I came to understand that was kind of driven through the ag community. So I don't know if anyone can provide some feedback that was part of those discussions. If not, then that's basically what the committee wanted us to take a look at, is that threshold. So
I'd have to look. It might go back to the NIPSI model ordinance.
Sure.
I don't remember what those are anymore, but that's what the basis was for a lot of things in Lake County as well.
And I'm not opposed to necessarily changing that number, but if we do change it, I'd rather have, a study or something that backs it up. That is something that potentially we can do as part of our watershed plans. Is already kind of, we're working through, we're hoping to get close to bring that to you guys, but right now we're looking at having analysis done to show what future build-out would do to water levels throughout the county, increase rainfalls, to potentially analyze if we want to go with specific release rates to reduce those impacts. So that could be something that we could throw into that study to get better information on the 20. I know that the 20 comes from a lot of other ordinances, Lake County, Kane County, they all reference that.
That doesn't specifically state what that storage has to be in that statement, does it?
No, it's just a trigger. It's just saying, hey, you've now triggered the need to analyze runoff reduction. And you would.
So it wouldn't have to be detention.
It doesn't have to be. It
Yeah.
can be infiltration, it can be, a number of different things or designs, whatever type of thing. But that's what came up during the MCSC. Al?
As I mentioned earlier, I did talk to Jody Wolnick this morning. I will send you an email of some of the items that they're doing down there
Okay.
to encourage infiltration and to get away from impervious issues of how they're handling it in their county. You can follow up with her, but I jotted out a bunch of notes. I'm not gonna share it now because I was just going to a bunch of discussion, which I think I want to get out of here right now.
Sure. Yeah, and we do have language that, for 1 acre developments or more, we're trying to encourage infiltration in those type of scenarios. And that's why in that hierarchy scenario, I went to infiltration as well.
So why can't this be looked at different than it is, 20,000? So you have the larger tracts, like, and specifically ag, where you have 40 acres, 80 acres, or 100, and you want to do a building, you pretty much take an acre right away with that building and the impervious around it for the driveway.
Well, again, I'm not saying that we don't need to change it. I think that we should have some justification. An acre of impervious is a lot. I think that potentially I can open that up, but how would I feel sure that your acre of impervious isn't gonna cause any issues? Right? That's always kind of the question that I
It has to
have.
go by the site plan. I mean, I've been through this, we're going through it. It just isn't enough square feet there when you're dealing with these large tracts.
So maybe, if you can show that, if the existing and proposed outflows are not changing, I don't know. I guess that's where I don't have necessarily, I didn't bring this in with any ideas on changes or anything like that. I'm just opening it up to the committee to see kind of what the thought process is.
So if you use like 10% on your total acres,
So
a
you want,
percentage number.
you want to increase the 5 to 10? Okay.
Looking at that, yeah.
No, I'm not,
Yeah.
again, the question was on the 20,000 square foot trip.
But you gotta look at the track and see if I'm gonna put up a building to my neighbor and it's all gonna run on my neighbors, well, that's not right then. But if it's all gonna stay on my property, then, and I don't wanna flood myself out either, so, I want all my land to be usable, but I don't want it, in my case, on a 40-acre parcel, I'd be required to put in 3.5 acres of detention and take that land out of production for what I wanna do.
Which isn't necessary, because you got enough surrounding land to absorb that.
Yeah.
Are there any ag exempts to the definition of regulated development?
No. We've been arguing about that for years too.
No, there's no ag exemption in the SMO. If it just talks to like agricultural processes, potentially like tillage, or, it references activities. No, there's no like ag exemption component to this.
When did the part of the sand come into impervious too in the ordinance now?
It's part of just general infiltration practices. If you have 6 inches of sand on 2 feet of clay, you're not gonna get infiltration after that first rain. You're just not. So that's why we don't,
How you know there's clay underneath the sand.
well, that's why we tell people, show us that you can infiltrate down. We don't have a problem with that. Like, I mean, we tell, like, riding arenas, horse arenas, we created a whole policy for them. Al's done a few. He's gone out, got some core samples and shown that it's feasible infiltration all the way through. We do have a specific rate that we incorporate that you need to meet for it to be considered true infiltration.
Maybe more an answer to your question, Mike. How do you know? There's a field of study, it's known as soil scientists. They go out, do corings, and based on their findings. So when he said, well, we need to know, it's that information that they're handed. And it gives not only what types of soils, it gives the infiltration as well. So it's not just clay or silt or sand or loam. It says it can absorb this much. So that's how they do that process.
And I've had those conversations with people, well, I'm just putting down gravel, it's gonna infiltrate. I said, fine, but I can't just take your word for it, otherwise everyone's gonna come in and say, my gravel infiltrates, when that's not the case. And depending on the type of gravel, is there fines, et cetera. So I never say no, I just say, if you provide me the necessary information, then sure, I would consider that as a permeable surface and it will count towards your impervious area. But that's where people don't necessarily want to do that. And yeah.
To get back to your question on the 20,000, Mike and I were talking, I think it's probably one of the more restrictive and lower thresholds for detention with impervious area. I think Lake County is half an acre or an acre of new impervious. DuPage is 25,000 square feet.
It's 25 too.
What's that?
Kane County's 25 as well.
Yeah, Cook County is, I think, half an acre. So it is probably one of the more restrictive, makes you one of the more restrictive counties.
Okay.
Could we get it to the same as the rest of the adjoining counties?
Yeah, what I can do is I can pull the rest of the counties, show you what the trigger is and, you know, what they're offering, and then we can take a look at some of those exemptions, the 1 acre and the 5%. I mean, it sounds like that's, I mean, to your concern, it sounds like you want to try to bump up the easement, the number 2 part of the language, is go from 5% to 10%.
I'd like to see that conservation easement go away too. I don't want the government tied to my property more either than they already are, so.
Through design, what he's saying is if he's allowed it by the 5% rule or whatever percent it is, if it's already recorded at your office, why are we going through and recording it?
That's
That easement.
That's not why that easement was put in there. The easement was put in, you alluded to it earlier. If you've got the absorption on your property, you don't need an easement. But if your neighbor has the ability to absorb your water, and he'll give you an easement to let your water go that way, that's why that was put in there.
That's not how it's being used.
That's not how they're using it.
Correct, it's not. They're putting around all the impervious area, and now they're calling that a conservation easement.
So then you can't put any more impervious in.
It's kind of the wrong word for it, but that's what came up
Yeah,
with.
yeah, basically. Yeah, it was to come up with a way to confirm that if, you know, you wouldn't be exceeding your 5%, or that there's something on file that, so if you were to sell the property as well. That's why it's recorded with the recorder's office, so it can come up, and at least someone, it doesn't preclude you from selling it, but at least the owner would know, and then they can decide, okay, I'm gonna change things around, which is fine, they can do that. That was the idea, is if we don't have anything, I don't know how we would keep track of it, right? Like, how would I keep track of all this impervious area that goes down, I guess, is the concern. And, you know, if this goes unchecked, it will start to cause drainage issues. I mean, I don't think anyone in this room is gonna, right?
Well, we already get that now with the subdivisions and the ag land adjoining. Just look a half mile on the other side of the wall here, so.
Well, you know, that's.
That's an old issue, but
That's part of
that's
it.
still.
I just don't know, you know, if there's a solution to keep everybody honest, I'm sure.
Satellite imagery.
County records ready for all the plans.
What?
Check if there's to be a comparison made, well, what do we approve and what's going on between the satellite and what was designed?
Right, but then what am I holding? Because if you remove the 5%, what am I holding, an acre? So if you go over an acre.
Well, keep the percentage.
Right.
We're just saying, get rid of the
Mike-
easement document.
Oh, get rid of the recording of it?
Correct.
And then basically staff would rely on aerial imagery? I can't
You're doing it
tell.
now already.
Yeah, but I can't tell half the time what it is.
Site visit, boots on the ground.
Well, true.
I mean, what if it's just changed to record the 5% impervious area? It's, we don't have to necessarily call, it's not really, I mean, it's an easement because
It's a documentation of the area.
yeah, it's kinda.
Just food for thought.
Yeah, I think you got a couple strands going in this.
I know this is an issue on Farm Bureau that we hear a lot. Guys want to put up another barn, they got kids coming back to the farm, but they've built since 2004, they've built a couple of barns or added a driveway, and now they're tied, they can't do that without having to go into the detention areas. So I would like to see the percentage onto that, instead of the square feet. And then the other question I have is that tied to PIN number parcel or the whole contiguous area?
Contiguous area, so you can use all the different pins that you have.
Yeah.
Well, and to your point, I've seen them before where we cut it and made new pins so we could pick up a new acre because of that problem, right?
Right.
We were maxed out on the whole 80, so we split the 80 in half.
Right.
And it had 240, so we could build and build, which, I mean, doesn't do anything.
You're still doing
but-
the same thing.
but
but
yeah, right. You know, but we're still using the entire 80 acres as our number, but we couldn't make the numbers work, right? So we split it into 240s, got new pins, now I can make it work. Based on the square footage.
Shouldn't have to do that. I don't know the math. Is that new developments? You're getting relief of?
This was a couple of years ago, but it was.
It shouldn't really matter if you're 5% of 80 or 40 and you're splitting it.
I think they're just doing the 20,000 square foot.
Yeah.
So you don't have to do the easement? I mean, yeah, technically you could do that.
But again, I mean, if the goal, what's the goal, right? And the goal shouldn't be to have to drive into my office to go, okay, how do we figure out how to do it? You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, in all honesty, the goal is to help with flood mitigation, right? And you guys are already experiencing that. So, 80 acres of land, if we throw out a percentage, whatever we feel it's comfortable, sure, we'll just move the goalpost, right? That's all we're doing is moving the goalpost. I don't know that we're necessarily making the situation better for that. And are we creating more concerns down the road? That's kind of my thought process behind that. I would love to find a great number we can all agree on. I think that's fair. I just don't know what that number is, and I don't want to say 10% should be it. I can look at the other ordinances and see what they do, and we can come up to their standards.
Let's look at the other ordinances and
Okay.
see.
Let's start there.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, I'll do that. I'll come back and I'll share with you guys to show you how they do it and what our differences is. All right, Ernest, I had thrown in this infiltration component on your behalf. I don't know if item 6.2, infiltration facilities and 200 feet of separation, that was something you were working on. I don't know if.
Well, it's health department's rule, and they use it as a guide on. They use it for not only their septics, also their wells. As far as they're concerned, if someone does an infiltration, in essence what used to be called a dry well, whether it's an independent structure or within the bottom of a basin to turn it into basically a detention instead of a retention basin.
Sure.
They start putting restriction parameters off of that, not just the intake, but whatever structure is below it. So if it's a 10-foot diameter structure, that's where the marks get taken off of. And I'm just saying, as you start looking into the infiltration part, you also have to watch to make sure that you're not making it unable to develop an area as well. I mean, if I put enough dry wells in, I can make an entire site unbuildable.
Right up to the edge.
And they were, and the reason I still remember it, back in the late 80s, early 90s, putting in a dry well in a basin was almost given, you just did it. And Health Department got into it then, especially as they started the development of their Article 4, when they kind of broke from you guys somewhat. And it's a big deal. So I mean, I only bring it up because, as we say, well, you can always do infiltration. Yeah, but that's one part of the equation, and you gotta make sure how that is affected by health rules. That was the only reason I brought it up.
Well, so to that note, should we remove and have per current, health requirements or something? Is that?
Yeah, at least it would
Because I
direct
think-
somebody, they wouldn't just do it and go, oh, I'm done, and all of a sudden then they stumble on it later.
Okay. All right, I'll look at revising that language and talk to health then.
That would be ideal.
Okay.
I really, and the person to go to, Patty Nam was still involved very much with it.
Okay.
And so if you went to Patty and say, that earnest troublemaker is giving us a headache about this, she'll, right away you'll have her on the same wavelength as you, because then you can move forward.
I'm familiar with Patty. All right, well, if there's no other discussion, I will, considering the time, consider a motion to adjourn.
Motion.
First by Tyler, second by Bruce, all in favor?
Aye.